Whenever a new AFL game comes out and it doesn't quite live up to expectations, there's always someone online who says, just get EA to make AFL games. Well, the reality is, EA actually did make a couple of AFL games back in the late 90s. In this video, we're going to take a look back at the EA era of AFL games, and why they stopped making them after only 2 entries. The 2 AFL games released under the iconic EA Sports brand were AFL 98, released for the PC in 1997, and AFL 99, released in 1998 for the PC and the original PlayStation. While these games were published by EA, they were actually developed by a British studio called Creative Assembly. Now, my personal history with these games is probably a little different to most. I got into AFL video games in the mid-2000s, with AFL Premiership 2005 and AFL Live 2003 being the first 2 AFL games I ever played. And having loved those games, I went back and tracked down some of the older titles to see what they were like. AFL 99 was really the first of these retro titles I played, and coming from the PS2 games to AFL 99 was an interesting experience. We all know how clunky and slow the PS2 games are, while in contrast to that, AFL 99 has a much faster pace and overall smoother gameplay experience. I think it makes sense to talk about the gameplay of AFL 98 and 99 at the same time, as they are largely the same game from that perspective, with 99 seeing improvements in presentation and the speed of play. So like I said before, these games are a much smoother experience than the PS2 games many of us grew up playing. AFL 99 in particular is all about quick ball movement, long kicks, big marks, and that sees the ball zip from one end of the field to the other. The flip side of this is that playing a kick mark style of footy is fairly hard to do, as the kicking mechanics after you've taken a mark are not designed for pinpoint passes. Similarly, the handball game is almost non-existent here, as handballs can be wildly inaccurate. It's fair to say it's a representation of footy as it was back in the 90s, a much more run and gun style of play than probably what we're used to nowadays. These games do feature the most satisfying hip and shoulder bumps we've ever seen in an AFL game, and high-flying speckies are seen frequently, probably too frequently if we're being honest, but they are equally satisfying. And yes, these games are also remembered for the actual one-on-one fistfights that could break out throughout the game. One area where AFL 99 in particular does excel is in tactics. The game offers a wide range of tactical options for centre bounce and around the ground ruck contests, as well as a good number of formation setups for kickouts. In all honesty, this is really an area that AFL 99 is still the benchmark for, as no game since has really replicated or surpassed what's on offer here. It's also worth mentioning the commentary from Bruce McAvaney and Lee Matthews, which is some of the better commentary we've seen in an AFL game.
The Bulldogs are playing with real confidence now. You can tell by the way the defenders are prepared to leave their man and run up the field.
While it's basic and often repetitive, it has much more natural flow, which I think largely comes down to the fact that the developers kept it simple. So far we've been talking about AFL 98 and the PC version of AFL 99. The PlayStation 1 version of AFL 99 is a different story, however. You can see both games are built on the same animation and gameplay foundation, but the PS1 version looks and plays like a slower, uglier version of AFL 98. I remember back in the day when our family PC would often crash while playing AFL 99, so I was pretty happy to find out it was available on PlayStation. You can imagine my disappointment when I fired it up for the first time and it just wasn't the same game. The one thing I do love about the PS1 version, however, is the 90s retro flavour that covers it, from the old school logos to those classic 90s mascots that are everywhere in this version of the game. Much better than the mascot manor versions we have nowadays. This was really back at a time when EA as a whole just made a much more interesting variety of games. From AFL to cricket, rugby league and union, and arena football, the 90s and 2000s were a much more exciting time from an EA Sports perspective. Granted, a lot of these sports are way too niche and have too small an audience for EA to put money into now, but you do have to wonder what could have been if EA continued to publish AFL games, and Creative Assembly were allowed to build on the foundation that was AFL 99 into the PS2 generation and beyond.